Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another wonderful edition of Wilds on Film. Today, I thought it was time we take a look at something, I'm a fan of, but I know not everybody is. So, I wanted to talk about Sin City. And I felt I needed some help with this, as is the usual format for this podcast. So, I asked my friend Aaron to join us. Hello, Aaron.
Hello, Steven. How are you doing today?
Not bad. How about yourself?
I'm doing all right, and I am excited to talk about Sin City as at one point it was one of my favorite films.
Interesting. Okay. Well, before we talk about the film, let me ask you real quick. How familiar are you with the source material, with the comics that the film is based off of?
Okay, I'm gonna be honest. I had not heard of Frank Miller prior to Sin City, but
Really?
after it came out, I watched the movie about 10 times, and I picked up everything I could on Frank Miller from whatever Sin City comics or graphic novels were out at the time. You know, Daredevil, a little bit of, I don't know, Ronin. There's a whole bunch of stuff out there. But yeah, I'm pretty familiar with some of the older Frank Miller.
Sure, sure. For those who may not know, Frank Miller is a very interesting and slightly controversial figure in the world of comics. But recently, I think most of the listeners may be interested in him because a lot of the work he did on Batman, specifically Dark Knight Returns and The Dark Knight Strikes Back, is being used in the Batman vs. Superman film. A lot of the themes and ideas from those comics have kind of translated over. But you are correct. Frank Miller also, if you aren't aware, did a very good run with Daredevil, and a lot of his stuff from Daredevil is actually being used currently in the Daredevil Netflix series. So he's got some work going for him right now.
Yeah, he also had a little bit to do with Wolverine, and he's had his hand in the pot pretty much all over the place. Anything
Correct.
that tends to have a bit of a darker twinge to it, Frank Miller's probably written for it.
That is very true. And speaking of dark, Sin City is one of those comics that is not only dark in its tones and violence, the nature of the beast, so to speak, but also in its art style. For those who don't know, the comic is done in a very black and white style with a little bit of splash of color here and there. And this translates over to the films. What did you think about the overall art style of Sin City, the film, when you first saw the trailer or saw the movie? Tell us how you kind of came to see Sin City for the first time and talk about the art.
Well, that's exactly what drew me in. I mean, it was like no other comic book or graphic novel film at the time. It looked like a comic book or a graphic novel. I mean, it had that kind of dramatic angles and the dark colors and the light colors, and like you said, just a little splash of red here and there, or maybe an eye color. And it's just it draws your eye in. Instead of looking at everything, it's black and white, kind of noir, with a little bit added. It's just the overall look of it is just really impressive.
It's interesting that you say that because you said it looks just like a graphic novel. And for those who may not know, and I'm not sure since you haven't read the comics if you're aware, but Robert Rodriguez, the director of both of the films, didn't actually use a screenplay for the film, for the first one at least. He literally took pages out of the graphic novels and pasted them together in the way that he wanted to see the story proceed. And they used that as the screenplay for the film, and that is why really there's no screenwriter credit on the film. The movie follows like it's just coming off the page. It's incredibly similar, like almost not quite shot for shot, but very close to it.
Well,
In the
yeah,
comic.
that's another thing that really drew me in after I had seen both the movie and read the graphic novel is that it's nearly identical. I mean, you're watching the graphic novel essentially,
Right.
just with live actors as opposed to Frank Miller's words, and I'm not quite sure who inked it.
I believe he did at least the first graphic novel. He did majority of the work himself. I know he had some help in doing the fine touches, but he may have done the inking himself in that first graphic novel.
Hmm.
So, did you see the first Sin City film when it came out in theaters?
No, I actually I remember getting it at a Hollywood Video. Uh, like I said, I didn't hear much about it when it was coming out in theaters, but once it came out, everybody was talking about it. I saw the trailer and I knew I had to see it, so I went and picked it up. And that's one thing I do like the cover. The cover has got kind of like a matte finish, except for like the white parts are shiny. I don't know. But yeah, I can't say I've seen either film in theaters, actually.
I had the opposite experience with this when we went to go see some other film. I'm afraid I forgot the name of it currently. We knew a guy who was the manager at a local theater here, and he said, "Hey, are you guys going to be on this area of town tomorrow? I want you to come see a film." And he didn't tell us which film at first, but he said, come by about 10:30, free screening on me. Now, I learned later that what he was actually doing was getting himself out of work so he could go handle other stuff, and we were watching the film and screen testing it before the big release on Friday.
Oh, that's really cool.
Hey, that's fine with me. We did that though, and we ended up watching Sin City. Now, I was already interested in Sin City because I had read some of the comics after I heard that they were making it into a film. I knew of Sin City's existence as a comic before then, but the black and white honestly threw me off at first, and I didn't actually, commit to reading it until I knew of the film coming out. However, we saw that initial screening, and I was really excited to see it. Like you mentioned earlier, I am a fan of film noir when it's done well, and I believe that Sin City, the comic book is such a film noir or just a noir comic, and so this lived up to that immensely. And seeing it on the big screen, I think I kind of feel for you because I think you missed out a little bit. It was a very cool experience, especially some of the shots and the way the movie was filmed.
Yeah, I can imagine. Did you have the same experience with Sin City: A Dame to Kill For?
I did not. One, I did not get to see it for free. I had to pay for it, so that may have been affected it in some way. Two, I will say that overall, and we're going to get into this a little bit more in a moment here, but overall, I felt like Sin City 2 was a watered down and hollow version of the first film.
Absolutely, I agree with that.
Yeah. Let's talk real quick about how the movie was shot. And the reason I mentioned that you may have missed out seeing it on the big screen is this movie was done in a particular style. I recently posted an article to social media about how the two men that were behind the effects of Sky Captain and The World of Tomorrow kind of revolutionized the film industry and get almost no credit for it because they made green screen filming cheap. They made that sort of film, the way to do that, affordable because before that it wasn't.
If I'm not mistaken, that was the project that a man worked on in his basement over the course of 10 years before a studio picked it up?
It was two men, and I don't know if it was 10 years, but I believe you're talking about the same thing, yes.
Okay, and yeah, that was almost entirely green screen.
Right, yes. Sky Captain and the World Tomorrow was about 99% green screen. Sin City, Robert Rodriguez is known for doing films on the cheap side. He doesn't like to have huge budgets. And if I remember correctly, I believe Sin City: A Dame to Kill For so far is his most expensive movie he's done. However, the first Sin City was all green screen except for 4 very small corner sets. What they mean by corner sets is that's the camera angle that you use to film that room. And that, if you know anything about the movie process, that's kind of, it's kind of crazy. Like, it's understandable why they do this because you're saving so much money on building sets, filming locations. There's a scene in Sin City where they, you see the characters in a car, but they're really not in a car. They're just sitting on 4 benches, like small benches. And so, this is a very interesting type of filming that a lot of people, will kind of say, oh, it looks fake and it doesn't look good. But what do you think about it?
You say it looks fake, and I was unaware. Like, obviously, you can tell some things have green screen to them. I was unaware of everything being green screen except for the few corner shots. Like, if you told me he was in a car, I'd believe he was in a car, or in, like, specifically when Marv is in the apartment at the beginning,
right,
and he goes down the staircase. That looks like a real staircase. I'm kind of blown away by that. That's really impressive.
Right. And I believe the few places where I know that the bar that they all frequent, which I believe is Katie's,
Yeah.
is that was one of the real corner sets, but then they green screened in some of the backgrounds, even in that. And then I want to say it was two of the other apartments and Bruce Willis's jail cell that he was in were the ones they wanted him to be able to actually grab the bars and stuff like that. So they
Uh,
built like a real jail cell for him. But again, these are super small sets. Now, I'm not the best at dealing with CGI and graphics and stuff like that. But what did you think about how it looked overall in the end? And did you think that the look changed between the two movies?
First of all, I think that it really pulled off kind of a realistic look. Usually when something's black and white, you can see more detail. It pulls that through. I don't know if that had something to do with it, but to me it looked like a living, breathing, real world, with a few exceptions. I think one part that really kind of looked fake was when they were driving up on the hill overlooking Sin City.
Oh, sure, sure.
And I believe that. That didn't look like any particular city, and it did kind of look CGI. But aside from that, the city looks pretty realistic. Sin City, A Dame to Kill For, I did see that on Blu-ray over DVD, but I do have to say, it looked 100% CGI.
See, I'm glad you said that because I have another friend that said the exact same thing. He said that he actually thought the green screen was more noticeable in A Dame to Kill For.
Yeah.
Now, they did try to do a little bit more. I believe in The Dame to Kill For, one of the scenes that a lot of people point out is when Marv is fighting Manute and he pushes him through a window and it kind of looks like it's coming at the camera at a bit of an angle. But a lot of people said that was one of the scenes where you can kind of tell that you're not dealing with real set stuff.
I mean, that particular scene didn't stick out to me, just like, I guess when they were climbing on the roof of the mansion or larger house. And when I remember a specific scene where Nancy's lying in bed and her room just looks like, I don't know, it looks like I'm looking at a video game or something. It doesn't look real.
Right.
Not that there aren't video games that look incredibly realistic.
Yeah. So, kind of wrapping up some of the details about not only the graphics, but about the way that the film was shot, I thought it was very interesting that you have Marv, played by Mickey Rourke, who is in a fight against Kevin, who I believe was played by Elijah Wood. And they're in a fight scene together. They have an entire, confrontation and fight scene. But yet, Mickey Rourke was talking about how he didn't meet Elijah Wood until the actual premiere of the film because they shot all their scenes separately. Most of the actors, if they weren't in pretty much all three stories, they shot a lot of their scenes for this in a day or a day and a half. I know Bruce Willis, I think, had the actual longest shoot time in front of the green screen. But I, again, think this is a really interesting idea and concept that a lot of people may not know about how this film was shot.
Yeah, that really surprises me because you look at it and it looks really well choreographed. When someone punches, I mean, usually you can tell when someone's doing a fake, okay, when he punches a foot in front of my face, I'll turn my head and we'll use some foreshortening. And this, it really looks like, I mean, I don't know if they had a stand-in, but like they're touching each other's arms. Marv's throwing Kevin. He wraps him around the tree. It looks like there's two people there interacting. It's really believable.
Yeah. One of the slight thing is, since we're mentioning Kevin, is that you can do a lot more in the editing phase for films like this. And one thing that they did was because they were using green screen and they had a lot more leeway with the black and white effect, they actually made his chin and his cheeks look different to give him more of an animalistic look. And I think that worked really well because I would not have recognized him as Elijah Wood had I not seen his name in the credits.
Huh.
Also, Benicio del Toro, who I believe played Jackie Boy, also had a lot of prosthetics and a lot of editing stuff done to make him look different. And once again, I recognize Benicio del Toro because he has a very distinct voice, but his face at first looked so different to me, and then I realized it was because they had added prosthetics and stuff.
That's interesting. I didn't even notice that. I mean, I guess his chin kind of sticks out a bit more. And if you think about it, there are little aspects of their face, but I'm used to seeing Elijah Wood as the Hobbit, so I figured that was what he normally looked like.
I understand. Let's talk about the story here for a moment. What we have is three stories in the first one that are bookmarked by a short story from the comics, which is the stuff with Josh Hartnett. And then we have, our basic story with Marv, Hartigan, and I just blanked on the last one.
Dwight.
And Dwight. So we have these three stories, and I feel like they work so well with the three stories where how that they connect and touch on each other. And then you have this bookmark with, Josh Hartnett's part. I believe that story is called The Customer is Always Right, or Customer Satisfaction, or something like that.
Okay.
And then in the second one, in A Dame to Kill For, the titular story, of course, is the Dame to Kill For. And then we have two other stories, one which never actually made it into the comics, but Miller had written. So I thought that was kind of interesting. But it didn't feel like it had the same connectivity, and it didn't feel like it was bookmarked as well. What did you thought? Yeah.
Okay, so I really love the structure of Sin City with Josh Hartnett kind of. It starts off with Josh Hartnett, and he pretty much sets the tone for the movie. And, you never know what you're going to run into. Turn the wrong corner, you never... Actually, that might be at the end where he says, turn the wrong corner, you never know what you're going to find in Sin City. But the three main stories are very well written. They all work well together. I mean, I at first struggled to place the timeline, but at the end, it's like it doesn't really matter the timeline. All the characters work well. Marv, I mean, the way Frank Miller writes him, he's kind of a dull guy, but when he speaks through Frank Miller's words, I mean, you can really see his motivation. He's a crazy guy, but you can see his motivation and sympathize with him. Hartigan, a lot easier to sympathize with, and Dwight, I mean, they're all good stories. Sin City, A Dame to Kill For starts off with Joseph Gordon-Levitt, is that correct? No, it starts off with Marv roughhousing some frat boys.
Oh, you're right.
That's when I first started to notice the poor green screen in that movie. But the flow, I was expecting there to be like an intro and an outro, and I don't know, 2 or 3 good stories in there. Instead, I got like kind of an intro, and then there's Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character, and I'm not sure, was he in the comics?
Yes, he's from... Actually, I have totally blanked on the name, but his character was from one of the original stories. Okay.
And then it moves into A Dame to Kill For, and that's where you are the rest of the film. I mean, it breaks back to Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character a couple of times, and it just kind of ends. No, I forgot. And then it goes on to Nancy and Marv doing like the most phoned in, kind of cheesy, who wrote this story arc, and then it ends.
Okay, let's be honest, and I'm gonna say this, and you can tell me if you agree or not, but I have never actually liked Jessica Alba as an actress. I admit she's very attractive. She has a lot of charisma and a lot of things that she does, but I've just never thought that she was a good actress.
Well, I'm going to disagree with you, and I'm actually going to use Sin City as the first one to prove that she is a great actress.
Okay.
She really sold the part in the first movie. In the second movie, it just seemed like either her heart wasn't in it, the writing wasn't right. I'm going to guess it was probably poor writing, because it was just a little ridiculous.
The dialogue isn't the best, and so I will grant you that, but I think we could also, if we really wanted to dive deeper into this, look at some other Jessica Alba films.
Well, yeah.
To say that. But as far as Sin City goes, I would say that she did a better job in the first Sin City than she did in the second one. She just had a lot more screen time, and it was more of a personal story in A Dame to Kill For.
Yeah, that could be it. I mean, if you shine a light on her for long enough, then... I don't know. Another problem I had with Sin City, A Dame to Kill For, was there was a lot of similar characters and dissimilar actors.
Right. And they had to change a lot of the actors, and then for story purposes, they wanted a different actor to play Dwight, who did you prefer between Josh Brolin and Clive Owen?
I love Clive Owen, but I think Josh Brolin did it justice in the second film.
Right.
Um, but
Clive Owen.
I did prefer Clive Owen in the first film.
Clive Owen was actually supposed to show up at the end of the second film, but he had a scheduling conflict and couldn't do it, so they just put prosthetics on Brolin.
I mean, it worked, but...
Right. One of the things that threw me off was when I was first watching the film, it took me a while to figure out that Jeremy Piven was supposed to be Michael Madsen's character from the first Sin City, Bob.
Yeah.
And that threw me off, until eventually the dialogue, I was like, okay, I think I know who he's supposed to be. And I also just wondered what the hell Michael Madsen was doing that he couldn't do that.
I did recognize that he was supposed to be the character of Bob, which just confused me more as to why, like, if his partner was supposed to be... I mean, it took place after, I think.
Right.
Sin City. That's another thing. It didn't bother me, the timeline, so much in Sin City, but in A Dame to Kill For, it just kind of seemed all over the place.
Sure.
And getting a little bit off topic, was Bruce Willis a ghost, or was that a figment of kind of Nancy's conscious?
Right. It was a part of her fractured mind, I guess you could say.
And that's why when Rourke saw him, spoilers, I didn't quite understand. I had thought that it was a part of Nancy's subconscious, and then Rourke sees him, and it just kind of confused me.
Right.
It didn't quite fit.
They don't explain it, and I guess it's just kind of left up to the interpretation of the audience.
I mean, a guy that would torture his own son doesn't seem the type who would be worried about another person's life from a couple of years ago.
Right. I don't imagine that it would be his mind that was concerned about it. So maybe it does break into the supernatural side of it, but they don't explain that. So Also, a quick note, for those who may not know, they did have to recast Manute, who was originally played by Michael Clarke Duncan, and he passed away. And I thought they found a good replacement for him.
Absolutely. And I mean, you can't really... He was a great actor, but you can't... If he dies, you got to recast him or cut him out. And considering how much of A Dame to Kill For revolved around Manute's character, that only seems fair.
Right. He's a pretty big character in the comics. He's kind of like the ever-present henchman in several of the books. So the other person, of course, was Brittany Murphy, who I believe played Shelley in the first movie.
Was she in A Dame to Kill For?
She was not. She technically has a pretty good chunk of story in the comics that she's a part, because she's pretty closely connected with Dwight. However, they decided to not recast her, and they just cut her part out of that. And they said it was more of kind of a respect thing. Probably also, it probably wasn't too hard to cut her part out of that. But I think that, that's something, because a lot of people whom I spoke to when Sin City first came out, they didn't realize that was Brittany Murphy. They didn't realize it was the girl from Clueless or King of the Hill, So it was interesting.
Oh, yeah. One thing I do want to point out, revolving around Manute's character, and just Frank Miller in general, is if you've consumed any kind of Frank Miller media, a huge thing of one of his themes is racism, and that's always like he tries to bring it to the forefront. All of the Nazi symbolism and like I guess patches and stuff on Manute and his men were completely missing. And I understand why a studio would take it out, but if it was in the first film, I don't know how it didn't get past the second film. It's just something that I kind of noticed.
That is interesting. I don't think I noticed that in my initial watching of that. That's kind of neat. Let me ask you, who is your favorite character overall from the two films?
I gotta go with Marv.
Oh, really? It's interesting considering what you were saying earlier about him. I figured you would say Dwight.
Dwight's they're all good characters. I mean, you gotta have respect for Hartigan doing the right thing no matter what. And Dwight's just kind of like this crazy guy.
Okay, understandable.
But Marv's kind of the fun guy. I mean, that's a damn fine coat you're wearing. It's a shame you're bleeding all... I mean, how do you not love that?
No,
he's just comically funny.
Yeah, he definitely has some of the best one-liners. All right, so let's talk about the directing for a second. So, for those who may not know this film, both of these films, I'm sorry, were directed by Robert Rodriguez. And Rodriguez, like I said, is kind of known for his particular style of shooting. He films almost everything he does in a studio that's near his home because he doesn't like the whole Hollywood lifestyle. There, there actually was a little bit of controversy when I believe it was the second one. They actually were trying to get Rodriguez was trying to get Frank Miller a directing credit as a co-director, and the Directors Guild wouldn't recognize his credit as a director on that. So Rodriguez actually left the Directors Guild, and he actually lost out on a couple of big movie projects from that, supposedly.
Oh man, but Frank Miller did appear as a co-director still.
Right. He in the credits he did. It's just the actual Directors Guild or whatever wouldn't recognize it.
Hmm.
Yeah. But Rodriguez supposedly has, his particular style and everything, and there's a lot of little elements. He actually has a couple of things like a brand of beer that can be seen through a lot of his different movies that shows up in Katie's in Sin City 1. And then there's a lot of little other kind of interesting things that come up throughout the movie that are either references to Frank Miller's old comics or other stuff like that. Quentin Tarantino, he has a brand of cigarettes that are in a lot of his films, and I believe that brand of cigarettes makes an appearance in A Dame to Kill For. And Tarantino actually directed a scene for the first one. Are you familiar with this?
I knew he did have a guest director credit in the end scene. It comes up, but I always assumed it was kind of the scene with Elijah Wood where he's got the Charlie Brown shirt on, because, in Kill Bill, you've got the Charlie Brown shirt. It's kind of a running thing, so if I had to guess, I would say it's that scene.
Right. That's a good guess, but that's actually not correct. It's the scene in the car with Clive Owen and Jackie Boy. I believe at this point Jackie Boy has had his throat slit and is now still talking to Clive Owen as they're driving. You mentioned kind of like the supernatural or fractured mind of Nancy earlier. This is another great example where it looks like Jackie Boy is more a voice in Clive Owen's head, but they decided to make it a more interesting scene and actually have him speaking. There's a small part in here where supposedly you can actually see the hole in the back of Jackie Boy's neck that they did on purpose as kind of a gag. But this scene it stands out as different because it has kind of a little bit different feel to it, but also it's the only scene in the movie that has that amount of color in it. And this is because that scene is directed by Quentin Tarantino. So the story behind this is that Robert Rodriguez is big into music, and he did a large portion of the soundtrack for Kill Bill Volume 2. And I believe, if I remember the story correctly, Tarantino was at risk of going over budget. So Rodriguez did it as a friend for $1. He was paid $1 to do the soundtrack. So Tarantino said he would return the favor by directing a scene in a future project for $1. And this is the scene that he repaid him with.
That's really interesting. I never would have guessed he directed that scene, but it's definitely a nice addition to the movie.
Right. Also something that a lot of people didn't know, and I didn't until I looked it up, but there is another reference to Kill Bill, since you mentioned the Charlie Brown shirt earlier. And the character of Miho uses two swords that were actually props in Kill Bill. They were two swords from the Crazy 88 fighters.
Oh, wow. I didn't even catch that.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people caught that. And I mean, it's, you have to have a pretty keen eye to catch something like that. But it was something I was reading about. Tarantino and Rodriguez have been friends for years, ever since, I believe, El Mariachi or something like that. But, it's been a while. So that it makes sense. It really works for their dynamic. And although I just said that you can tell kind of a difference in the directing style, they definitely have similar styles.
Now, I do want to touch on something, and that's that a lot of films tend to fail, especially comic book films, as the result of executive kind of interference. And in a movie where Frank Miller pretty much had his graphic novel brought to screen, we were just talking about the guest director, I'm blanking on his name.
Tarantino.
Quentin Tarantino got to come in and direct a scene. I kind of wonder if there was less, executive meandering in the films, in a lot of films, if they would be a lot more true to the comics, or just enjoyable experiences.
No, I mean definitely. I've always said, and this isn't new. I think most people know this. That the production companies and the studios, they have their hands in the pot a lot, and they see this as their money being spent on a daily basis. So they're of course very concerned about what's being done and what's going on. And I agree. I think if they would kind of sit back and try to trust in the director that they've appointed or whoever a little bit more, we might be getting a little bit better quality of films. I don't think Sin City had nearly any of those problems because, Rodriguez even said he didn't consider it a film adaptation as much as a translation of the comic. He told the studio that he wanted to do it exactly like the comic, and they seem to have let him get away with that for the most part. I didn't read about any major changes that were made that weren't made by by Frank Miller and Rodriguez. One of the kind of big deals that I'm really not sure why this was a big deal, but originally the part of Nancy Callahan, and this is something that applies in the comics, once she is captured, she spends pretty much the rest of the comic topless. And the original role called for the actress to be topless for the whole end sequence to that. And I believe Jessica Alba actually signed the contract before she realized that the nudity scene was in there, or there was some mix-up like that. And so she said she didn't want to do it. And Miller and Rodriguez decided that they were okay with that. That they, for some reason, they really decided that they wanted her to do it, and they didn't want to have to recast. So they wrote that part out.
I gotta say, in the film there is nudity. There's topless women aside from what would have been.
Right.
But that seems a little shady that she could be presented with a contract without her realizing that there's a decent portion of the film being topless. So I think if they didn't, that'd be a little, a little messed up.
Well, I'm not sure how that all went down with the contract signing. There's kind of I've read a couple of different accounts of how that happened. And I agree with them. I don't think it was important. Her being topless did not, need to happen. And I think Eva Green made up for it. Eva Green plays Ava Lord. I think she made up for it in the second one.
See, I know that you love Ava Green, or Eva Green. Now I'm confused. But honestly, I think Jessica Alba's the front runner for me for the Sin City films.
Really?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I have to ask. So you're telling me that you think that Jessica Alba is a better actress than Eva Green?
Oh, actress? No.
Okay, all right. I had to make sure.
No, as far as just the bombshell for the film. Eva Green acts the part, and just the way she manipulates people is just incredibly fun to watch. Like, you can see how she's working with these people, and it's just like even with Josh Brolin's character Dwight, you could see she was controlling him. He knew she was controlling him, and yet they went with it, and she really kind of pulled that off. I'm just saying her topless scenes didn't do anything for me.
Sure, okay. I understand where you're coming from with that. While we're talking about actors and actresses real quick, something you may or may not know, the role that Nick Stahl plays, which is Junior in the first one, was actually originally offered to Leonardo DiCaprio. Unfortunately, he declined the role because I think he said he was waiting to hear back from other projects and just didn't want to commit to anything. Scheduling is always a big issue in Hollywood, and that's actually why Johnny Depp was offered not only one role for Sin City, but he was offered two different roles for Sin City 2, and he had to turn all of the roles down because of scheduling. He would have originally played Joseph Gordon-Levitt's character had everything gone through.
Who would he have been in the first? Would he have been the same character in the first film?
I'm not sure. I actually don't think I read which character in the first film that he was supposed to play.
See, I don't have a problem with Johnny Depp is a good actor, but he's just in everything. Like anytime there's a call for an actor to have makeup on
Yeah.
and kind of act a different part, it seems like, oh, let's get Johnny Depp on the phone.
I'm so sorry. He was supposed to play Jackie Boy in the
Oh,
first one. Yeah.
that would work.
Yeah, I could have seen that working. The other interesting side note that I have for this is that Joseph Gordon-Levitt actually turned down an unspecified role in Guardians of the Galaxy to do Sin City 2.
Oh, oh, damn.
I kind of wonder if he's regretting that decision.
Yeah, yeah, damn.
Since
I mean, I
yeah,
just want to establish I think I saw on your top 10 list that you did include Guardians of the Galaxy pretty high on there, right?
I think it was my number two. Yeah.
Number two, yeah, incredible film. It's probably one of the most kind of unique comic book films out there. And for a dame to kill for, ooh, that's gotta sting.
Now, I'm not sure how Joseph Gordon-Levitt is. He may not be the type of actor that, has a lot of regrets. He does, some actors do projects they want to do and they don't regret not being in the big money projects. But I also happen to think, other than just making a lot of money, like we just discussed, that Guardians of the Galaxy is really good. But I think it's kind of interesting sometimes to see what almost happened. It's like that thing where, Will Smith was almost the main star of The Matrix instead of Keanu Reeves. You just kind of wonder how much different it would have been, how that would have played out.
Hmm.
Overall, though, let's talk about the general quality of the films. You seem to really like the first Sin City, but tell me what your overall thoughts are on the second one.
Okay, on the second one, I just felt like the green screen looked incredibly fake. I thought that the writing was, aside from A Dame to Kill For, and, okay, the one with Joseph Gordon-Levitt was well written, and it was, I don't know, well directed, but it wasn't what I would say up to what I expect from a Sin City film. And the other one with Jessica Alba and Marv, it just didn't seem. It seemed like they didn't give it their all, or maybe they. I think that one's gone on to become a graphic novel afterwards, I believe, but it just didn't seem like it was pre-existing. Like maybe it was written for a film, as opposed to written from comic and adapted. It just didn't seem the same at all, kind of out of place, and the whole film just kind of seemed disjointed.
Right. I can understand that. I think that they were trying to recreate something awesome, and whereas in the comics it lived, these additional stories, except for the one that wasn't printed, lived up to their predecessors. I don't think the film was able to, and it honestly felt like that Miller and Rodriguez even pulled a few punches in this one. That
Oh,
they,
absolutely.
right. We discussed Rodriguez's prowess in the music field briefly. What did you think about the music from the two films?
See, I am not much of a music guy. You could play me the greatest score ever, and then follow it up with like elevator music, and I wouldn't notice. So I can't much contribute to that, unfortunately.
Interesting. I would actually say that the first film had a pretty good soundtrack. I remember listening to it a few times when it first came out. The main theme, I believe, is called Cells, and it's just one that gets stuck in your head and it's very catchy and it works for action or just general other scenes. And then there were a couple other really good scores on there. So I can't say that I found anything too memorable in the second one, except that there were some of the same types and same tones of music. But unfortunately, I
Hmm.
think that kind of blended out. I think maybe they should have tried to make it stand out a little bit more.
Yeah, I think they were both. They didn't hurt the films. They didn't take away from it at all, or distract, I guess.
Right. So, if they were to do another Sin City movie based off of completely new stories or a few pre-existing ones, what would you like to see in a new Sin City film that would make it, in your opinion, as good, if not better, than the first one?
Well, I think that there's a lot of really stellar Sin City other graphic novel issues, or volumes, episodes, whatever they're called. And I think the ones they chose for A Dame to Kill For, aside from the main A Dame to Kill For, were kind of not the best. I specifically remember there's one where this guy, I think he's like a private investigator, and I remember one thing is he doesn't hurt dogs. He doesn't like to see dogs get hurt. So he's chasing down this criminal, and everywhere he goes, he finds bloodshed, and then he finds a dog who's been shot, and he pretty much just loses his shit and goes on a rampage. That one really struck a chord with me, and there were a couple of other ones. It's been probably, I don't know, a good 7 years since I've read them, but there are some great Sin City stories, and I just wish that they would kind of bring more of those. And maybe they don't translate well. That could be it, that they thought that it wouldn't work well on a big screen with actors, but maybe a little more of some of their better issues would be nice to see.
Okay, good, good. I also think that they should, in essence, do it for those who really liked the first film. I think one of the things that made it work was that they were completely true not only to the source material, but they were true to what they wanted to make. And maybe there's some behind the scenes stuff that we're not aware of in this, but I want them to just go at it full force again. Just do what they have to, do what they want. See, you know, I would definitely give another Sin City film a chance, but I have to say that the 7 year wait just wasn't worth it for the
No.
newest installment.
I mean, okay, let me ask you this. Do you think it's a good film?
I think it's a decent film,
Did you enjoy it?
sort of.
See, that's the thing. I can recognize that it's probably not the greatest film or not necessarily a good film even, but I enjoyed it. It was nice to see Sin City on the screen again.
Right.
But yeah, if they did it again, I would like to see it actually done with the effort of the first movie.
One of my kind of judging things for a movie when I tell people if I'm introducing them to a franchise or a series, I say this one's good. You have to watch this one. This one, you know, if I tell you, hey, this one's worth the follow up if you like the first one, that means I like the movie. I'm afraid with this particular example, I would say you have to watch the first one. It's really good, especially if you like certain styles of movies, noir, action, comic book movies, whatever. However, I would be like, unless you just loved the first one, you should probably not bother with the second one.
Yeah, that's fair. I don't know, the first one was just so iconic. I mean, everyone, even my parents, were watching Sin City, and then Sin City: A Dame to Kill For. Someone like me, its release just went right over my head. I heard about it afterwards, and what I heard was that it just completely bombed, and I can see why.
Well, Aaron, I want to thank you for coming on the podcast today and talking to us about Sin City and giving us some of your opinions and everything about that.
Oh, no problem. It was fun to do this.
If anyone would actually like to contact you and talk to you more about these films or others like it, where can they find you?
You can find me on twitter.com/arcade_android, and that's where you probably find me the most.
And do you have any other projects or anything you're working on currently?
Oh yeah, I do video game reviews on YouTube, and that would be youtube.com/arcadeandroid without the underscore. And also I do some writing for Gaming Rebellion. Yeah, just gamingrebellion.com.
All right, good. I want to thank you again, and I want to know what all the listeners think, if you like the first Sin City, if you didn't, and what you thought about the follow-up, A Dame to Kill For. So you can let us know in the comments or find us on Twitter. All the information will be in the description below. But until next time, thank you all for joining us.